It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. May the 4th be with you. It's May the 4th, and may it be with you. On this week's episode, we have Ahsoka and Andor Season 2 details, plus we'll talk a little bit about this very, very special Star Wars day. As always, thank you so much for checking out the podcast. You can find out more about the podcast that I do for My Nerd World and my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK, at mynerdworld.net.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, here for another episode to talk about all things in a galaxy far, far away on another Star Wars day. Happy May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. I don't want to say that I am ambivalent to this day, but when you consume as much Star Wars as I do, and I'm going to make an assumption you do as well, considering the fact that you listen to this podcast, there's kind of an everyday Star Wars day. Like, I had to not wear a Star Wars shirt yesterday to make wearing a Star Wars shirt today special, because I wear Star Wars shirts as often as I do. I'm not one, and I've probably talked about this every May the 4th, so I'm not one to go and diss May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. We did get some new content on Disney Plus. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. I traditionally like to celebrate more of May 25th, since that was the release of the original Star Wars. But even that's become contentious these days. I saw people tweeting that, it's all those out there that only celebrate May 25th, let go. Today's a good day too. And it is a fun day. So I'm still trying to decide exactly how I want to celebrate doing that thing with my fingers, because I have a busy day ahead of me. But I may have the opportunity to sneak in a Star Wars movie later on today. I just don't know which one it's going to be. Probably The Rise of Skywalker, since it's been on my list for a while. I've been watching the sequel trilogy, and I'll probably reserve A New Hope for its official anniversary day coming up on May 25th. So, but it is a special day, so I wanted to make sure I got the podcast out a little bit early. Typically, I get it out on Friday. So, happy May the 4th to you. I did have a chance to watch the first episode of Visions. So, because it's May the 4th be with you, Star Wars Day. This has become a day where typically the toy companies put out a lot of product, or at least they announce product. Disney Plus, the past few years, has changed the graphics on the app to reflect the day, and we've been getting new content. So today we got a new Simpsons special based off of Rogue One, which I probably won't end up watching. I'm not really a Simpsons watcher, and as I've said many times on the show, I'm a canon guy more than I am a parody Legends guy, so it just doesn't really do anything for me. I did get a chance, though, to start watching Visions. I really enjoyed the first season of Visions. I find it fascinating to see not just a different style Star Wars, but the stories that get told when there are no storyline constraints. I find that aspect of it most compelling. That these are individuals who, in a creative realm where things are very heavily managed, to make sure that canon, and we're going to get into that with a couple of the stories that we have this week, where the stories are told so they can fit together within the canon and the larger storytelling. Visions is one of the unique opportunities where, apart from parodies like The Simpsons doing a Rogue One parody. These creative talents can make animation, but tell stories where they have no constraints whatsoever. So it's really interesting to see what they gravitate towards. So I've only had a chance to watch the first episode and part of the second. The first one I quite enjoyed. These aren't typically pieces of Star Wars content that I go to watch over and over again. I have watched a few of the episodes from season 1 when I've only had a certain amount of time and I wanted to just consume some Star Wars content. And I can imagine the first episode, the Sith, I may do that with season 1, but again, it's the only one that I've watched. But interesting storytelling none the least. And in that particular episode, playing with the idea of the, the dark and light side, an individual who may have both of them and maybe utilizing both the dark and light side to their advantage. The choice of ship design and vehicle design I find fascinating. You know how much I love ships if you listen to the show. So really looking forward to watching the rest of Season 2. Will not be how I go and celebrate May the 4th be with you with limited screen time. I definitely want to watch something that's more classic and typical to what I would watch of Star Wars. So more than likely that's going to end up being the rise of Skywalker. So how did you celebrate your May the 4th? Did you? Or are you like me and you kind of celebrate Star Wars every day? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com or leave a comment up on YouTube.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, let's get into a couple of news items. We have some Season 2 of Andor news and Dave Filoni talking Ahsoka. The first article comes out of Empire. Of the many miraculous things about Andor, writes Empire, Tony Gilroy's the writer and showrunner. His astonishing Star Wars series exploring the rising rebellion in the 5 years before Luke explodes the Death Star. Perhaps the most miraculous of all is how gripping it is, even when we know exactly what is going on. And I mentioned last week, but I have been doing a rewatch of Andor, and I'm finding myself appreciating it a lot more than I did the first time around. It is very enjoyable. This was not a show that I expected that I would go back and rewatch, and I'm kind of eating crow on that front. I think I have to be in the mood to watch an entire series, whereas with The Mandalorian, I can more readily go and pick and choose episodes I want to watch because the stories are self-contained, whereas with Andor, that's one that if I go back and rewatch, I'm going to want to rewatch over a period of time the entire series. But I am very much enjoying it more so than I did the second time around than I did the first time around. Getting back to the Empire piece, focusing on Rogue One's rebel fighter Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna, we already know his fate in that 2016 film. Let's see. And from the beginning, Gilroy has been clear. His show will finish at the exact moment we meet Andor in Rogue One. Now, with filming on Andor Season 2... set to skip a year every few episodes in the series, moving beyond the midway point, Gilroy has teased a little more of what to expect from the time-hopping final run, telling Empire that the final block of 3 episodes will specifically cover the last 3 days before Rogue One. And with a finite endpoint in view, no punches being pulled. The risks this season will take are very different, promises Luna. In what way? In every way, says Gilroy. Look, man, I'm not trying to make a career move here. If anything, I'm on the downhill side of a long career, but this is an opportunity. This is 1,500 pages of the most dynamic material in these people's lives to deal with. We got it right the first time, and you don't want to let your foot off the gas. While we know the fates of Cassian Andor and Mon Mothma for many of the cast of characters, their futures are less clear. Denise Go says her villainous Dedra Meero is powering up in Season 2. And diehard revolutionaries like Stellan Skarsgård's Luthen Rael will face the growing pains of the rebellion. Some of its core ingredients are secrecy and paranoia and lack of trust and betrayal. So, how difficult is it to build a revolution, questions Gilroy, and what happens to the original gangsters as other people get involved? Strap in, the uprising has only just begun. What I'm most looking forward to with this, and I'm already suspecting that I'm going to be enjoying Season 2 much more than I did Season 1, even though I said on a rewatch I've been enjoying it quite a bit. But what I'm most looking forward to is the fact that Rogue One, this amazing film, is going to end up actually being the finale for Andor. Like, Andor can get away with sort of ending. If it's leading right up to the moment where we meet Andor at the beginning of the film, then you kind of have a luxury in terms of ending it where it doesn't necessarily have to go out on a major note. I mean, you want to wrap up some of the stories that you've been telling within the show. It does kind of give you some freedom and, you know, put you in a position where you're not hamstrung to have some epic finale, because Andor's kind of it. On top of what I've said many times, and that is the material, prequel material to any other existing material within the Star Wars universe, and its ability to add context to what came before. And that's really cool. I mean, we already have that with Season 1 of Andor going into Rogue One. If you've gone and watched Rogue One since the release of Andor, having hopefully watched it, then you've probably experienced the same thing I've experienced. When you watch the show, scenes and dialogue and moments take on new meaning. They have a deeper feel to them. There's more depth and context to what we're seeing, and that's with Cassian, and certainly with, and probably for me most specifically, with Mon Mothma. And it'll be fascinating to see in Season 2 how she goes from her time on Coruscant to, you know, being the leader of the rebellion. So I'm really, of the shows that are coming up, and I know we're going to have to wait a while before we see Andor, I'm certainly looking forward to Season 2 in a way that I wasn't looking forward to Season 1. Now, we're also just a few months away from the Ahsoka series. Entertainment Weekly went and asked Dave Filoni if Ahsoka is essentially a live-action Season 5 of Star Wars Rebels. Following The Crew of the Ghost, Rebels ran for 4 seasons. The final scene depicted a time jump in which Ahsoka and Sabine Wren embark on a mission, to find their Force-wielding friend Ezra Bridger, who sacrificed himself to be zapped through hyperspace alongside the villainous Grand Admiral Thrawn to parts unknown. Ezra's out there somewhere, says Sabine to the end of the series, after gazing upon a mural she had painted of the Ghost crew. Now, we've seen that mural in some of the teaser footage that's leaked out for Ahsoka. And it's time to bring him home. That journey to find Thrawn, and thereby also Ezra, has already been teased through Ahsoka's appearances, courtesy of Rosario. We asked Rebels and Ahsoka showrunner Dave Filoni exactly what he and Jon Favreau stopped by EW's Dagobah Dispatch podcast. To which Filoni replied, "That's an interesting question. I suppose that's one way of looking at it because of the epilogue I did in Rebels, whether or not Ahsoka is essentially a live-action Season 5 of Rebels. Definitely all signs are indicating that there's a continuation. However, the man who created these characters in animated form and now gets to shepherd them in live action prefers to take a more expansive view. He says, for me, when I'm telling these stories, I don't limit things like, oh, well, I did it in an animation, so I would do it distinctly different in live action. There's just the story that is, and I was telling it in one medium." So this would explain, and he gets into more detail here in a moment, but this would explain, for me at least, why we've already seen what we believe is the shot from the end of Rebels in live action in the Ahsoka teaser trailer. And it's different, especially with Sabine, and her hair is longer specifically. And Star Wars fans get tripped up on this. I do too. I want some continuity. And I think what Dave Filoni is saying here is that was the animation medium. This is the live action medium, and I may go and change some things. This also rings true for the end of Rebels, spoiler alert, when the Purrgil come, grab Thrawn's 7th Fleet, jam their tentacles through it to capture them, and then blast off through hyperspace. One has to ask the question of how are they surviving through hyperspace without any sort of equipment on. So we'll see if that actually gets answered in the live-action series, it may just be one of those things that we don't get an answer to. But that was one of the things that I immediately thought was, I kind of thought, okay, Thrawn and Ezra are dead, because how in the world are they going to survive through hyperspace without wearing a pressure suit? But to what Dave Filoni is saying here, perhaps I'm thinking too much about it. He went on to say, Rebels is a different style than Clone Wars, even visually. That changed the way I would execute certain things in Rebels. The story kind of evolved since I worked on Rebels. Working with Jon Favreau and setting things down in The Mandalorian created an opportunity to see how does Ahsoka work as a character in live action, by example. Considering Filoni created the character himself, transitioning snips to live action was both meaningful and nerve-wracking for the director. With the head tails and the makeup, what does that look like? Can a performer bring that to life in a way that is meaningful? It took seeing Ahsoka in human form right in front of him to assuage his concerns. I was very fortunate. The whole thing kind of came together for me with Rosario when we talked with her and she put on the costume and became Ahsoka. I was like, this is going to work. It really kind of was as simple as that. Now, Filoni also credits some sage advice from the president of Lucasfilm for calming his nerves about the transition. It goes back to a quote that Kathleen Kennedy gave me when I was really going over the casting of Ahsoka. I said, how do you know when it's the right person? And she looked at me and said, Dave, you just know. I'm in a very privileged position to have a mentor like her advising me and just giving the knowledge that you need to make choices creatively that you end up doing. And she was right. I just knew it when it was Rosario, and that kind of brought Ahsoka together for me, and off we ran. So Ahsoka will be coming out in August, so we'll know in fairly short order exactly what happens in that show. Really looking forward to it, obviously. The one last item that I wanted to mention this week was, I didn't include it up with the news, but Deadline had a report that Taika Waititi had said that his Star Wars movie, which we kind of all thought had been paused or put on the back burner after the announcement during Star Wars Celebration of the Dave Filoni Mandoverse movie, the episode 10 movie that I'm calling it, take place 15 years after The Rise of Skywalker, and the James Mangold Jedi origin story taking place thousands of years before anything that we've seen on screen, that the Taika Waititi movie wouldn't happen. But according to Deadline, Taika Waititi said he expects to be shooting his film next year. So I have no idea what that means for the theatrical releases. So we'll see what shakes out with that. Some people aren't putting a ton of stock into that. We'll see. I think most of the expectation is we'll get the post The Rise of Skywalker film before any of the other ones. But as I've talked about on previous episodes, there's a lot of timing issues there where Filoni's film could also potentially come first. And one more item I wanted to mention, I forgot about this, or I would have included it in news and rumors. But apparently, so Damon Lindelof, as we talked about, he was originally writing this film. He was with the story group, had written a script that would be the movie that I was just talking about by, I can't remember the director's name now, from the documentary filmmaker and the Miss Marvel director. So he was asked to leave after turning in a script, which is rumored to not be very good. I mentioned last week, and I was wrong. The reports were that his script was about an elder Rey teaching a new Jedi Order. I said that I was taking that as more of a, she's an elder to young people, it would still be played by Daisy Ridley. Apparently that wasn't the case. Apparently the story that was being written or was written by Damon Lindelof was actually an elderly Rey. I mean, decades and decades out from the events in The Rise of Skywalker, and they were writing the script based off of Helen Mirren playing Rey Skywalker training a new batch of Jedi, and that was apparently rejected, and they opted to go with a story that takes place 15 years after The Rise of Skywalker using Daisy Ridley as Rey. So, now, whether or not they retain any of the other elements of that script remains to be seen. It does sound similar from Rey training a group of Jedi. It's just not being an elderly Rey, and I'm glad they're going the route of Daisy Ridley. and 15 years after. If I had my choices without seeing any of the details of the story in and of itself, I would much prefer sticking closer to the timeline of what we know in The Rise of Skywalker and building upon that than jumping that far out, some 50 some odd years from what happened in The Rise of Skywalker. So, but as with all these Star Wars projects, once we get casting news and the filming actually begins, I kind of just hold my breath to see if it's actually going to go and take place, because so many projects have come and gone over the years. All right, that wraps up the show this week. As always, I want to remind you, if you want to support my nerd world and the podcast that I do, if you're a reader and you like sci-fi, I hope you'll pick up my EMBARK science fiction adventure series, where you can follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey of survival from Earth to the far reaches of space as they fight for humanity's future among the stars. Available in ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook at Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. Thank you so much for checking out the show. May the 4th be with you. I'm looking forward to hearing from you and how you're celebrating this May the 4th. We'll talk to you again next week, and until that time, I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, you are safe. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.